did you meet these fantastic men? Ian, Paul, it's so lovely to have you here with us. Welcome. And I raise my glass to welcome you. We have the Vice President of Marketing from Zing Zang, the company who makes the best, not only mixers, but now ready-to-drink cocktails. Extraordinary friend Diane Mina joins us from her home in Las Vegas, where she has
Need a push getting your spirits, wine, or beverage brand into the hands of consumers? Interested in winning medals like a double gold award? Proof Awards, the ultimate beverage competition, can help jumpstart your brand into the hands of beverage buyers. Enter the Proof Awards. Be a part of the Proof Awards marketing campaign with our partner, Food and Beverage Magazine. All of our judges are buyers, and that's what sets our awards program apart from the others. Our judges head the beverage programs for restaurants, bars, nightclubs, casinos, liquor stores, big box retail, and national wine and spirits distributors. Your brand will be tasted by buyers from more than 15 states across the U.S. We have hundreds of categories to choose from at www.proofawards.com. Be seen by 12 million readers with our partner, Food and Beverage Magazine. Get tasted and rated by buyers. The Proof Awards competition is open for spirits, wine, and beverage brands today. Proof Awards, moving brands into the marketplace. www.proofawards.com.
Whether you are thinking about becoming a restaurateur or you are already in the business, Michael Politz has written a must-read, The Food and Beverage Magazine's Guide to Restaurant Success. Pick up your copy today at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, or wherever fine books are sold.
Welcome to Proof Live, where booze brands in the right hands. On a quest for the best tipple and toast with the most exciting and respected bottlings. Competing for the 100-point Perfect Score Century Award and the double gold and a spot on the top shelf to be sipped, shaken, stirred, and celebrated. Slide up to the bar with the biggest names in the spirits game as they clink glasses with your hostess, legendary connoisseur Jennifer English, for intimate conversations, live tastings, product launches, and the happiest hour there is. Now, broadcasting live from the commodious confines of the Swanky Proof Saloon, where the liquid elite meet, here is your hostess, the Madam of Manhattans, the Duchess of Daiquiris, the Queen of Conviviality, your hostess, James Beard Award winner, Jennifer English.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm Jennifer English. I'm the editor-at-large of Proof Magazine. I'm one of the judges at the Proof Awards, and I'm also very fortunate to be the host of Proof Live. One of the things that the Proof Awards really is distinguished at doing is recognizing the very finest products from the distillers who are passionate about what they make and create literally the best sips in the world. So you've met the Century Award winners, you've met some of the leading distillers in the country, and we're going to expand our horizon today. We're going to take you to a place that you may not necessarily think of when you think whiskey. We're going to take you to the coast, the mid-Atlantic coast of the United States. Now, you may think, well, maybe there's some similarity of whiskeys and Kentucky in that region. No. What we're going to do is, you would think you might want to talk rum when you talk about the shipping and the coastal life in Virginia. But in fact, one of the most extraordinary things that's happening is that great whiskey is happening everywhere. And we have found some of the greatest whiskeys being produced everywhere. Today, the King family joins us from Ironclad Distilling in Virginia on the coast. And it's aged and it's beautiful and it's a mash bill that doesn't taste like anything else. And we're very fortunate that 8 years ago, they undertook the effort to create in this beautiful 100-year-old distillery something quite extraordinary. Please help me welcome Owen King. He is from the Ironclad Distillery. And of course, when we hear the name Ironclad, like all good history buffs, I grew up in New England and I spent time at the Constitution Marina not too far, maybe 25 yards from Old Ironsides. The idea that iron was so important in both protecting and foundationally to our American history. I think this is such a great story. Owen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's talk a little about the name Ironclad and the dream of how this was born. Which came first?
So the dream came first. My dad and I, well, it's kind of started as my dad's idea. So he bought this 30,000 square foot warehouse in downtown Newport News about 15, 16 years ago. And when we were sitting there, you know, he had another business operating out of the distillery, and we were trying to figure out to maximize the potential of this building. The one thing that we kept coming back to was, you know, what takes up a lot of space is bourbon barrels. And so we had a lot of space. So we kept talking about that. And one day I walked into work and he's like, hey, by the way, I bought a still. And I was like, oh, great. We're bootleggers now. And so, you know, we realized that you can home brew all you want, but home distillation is illegal. So we're like, all right, well, let's go through, and we don't want to go to jail for this. So let's go through, get our permits, get our licenses, do all that. And so that's what we did. And that was 8 years ago now. And so now we're here cranking along, aging bourbon, having a lot of fun.
The name Ironclad is so powerful and symbolic in U.S. history. Can you talk a little bit about how the Ironclad name came to adorn your labels and identify what it is that you all are doing?
So being in Newport News and being in the southeastern Virginia, God, you know, we are surrounded by history. So, you know, whether it was the surrender of Cornwallis in Yorktown or multiple battles in the Civil War, our distillery, the reason we called ourselves Ironclad is because had our building been there in 1862, when the battle between the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia took place, we would have had a front row seat to watch that battle take place. Right. So we wanted to make sure, you know, you got a little history with your whiskey. So you're getting smarter while drinking instead of, you know, occasionally dumber.
So the state of Virginia is one of my favorite culinarily speaking, because you have all of the mid-Atlantic confluence of seafood and then country, Southern. There are traditions that come through this nexus point in Virginia. And you have everything from the extraordinary oysters and crabs to certainly the country hams and biscuits. And what was really interesting when we had our first sniffs and our first taste of this sort of introductory sip, I was craving a traditional biscuit with country ham as much as I was craving a fried oyster. This to me is the perfect companion sip to the cuisine culture of Virginia. Can you talk a little bit about this whiskey's profile and taste? And we should mention that we're sipping specifically and tasting this one now, and we'll talk about the rest of your line in a second. But let's start with what you sent us to be introduced to.
Yeah, so what you're sipping right now is our straight bourbon. So this is our 4-grain mash bill. So when we started the distillery, the one thing I was really adamant about was I wanted to make sure I was showcasing Virginia agriculture. So all of our distillery grains are grown 45 minutes north of the distillery. And that was the one thing I really wanted to make sure that we were really focusing on, because I wanted to showcase that Virginia does have really great agriculture. So, you know,
so what are the grains? Can we just run through that for people? Because to be a bourbon, right? To be
a bourbon has to be at least 51% corn. So this mash bill is 70% corn, 10% wheat, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. So this one, when you're sipping it, you know, right away, you get that sweetness up front because you get that corn and that wheat, which is those are the sweeter of the grains. And then as it kind of finishes, you're going to get that black peppery note in the back, that little spicy rye kick, where the rye is there to kind of balance it all out. So before it gets cloying or a little too sweet, the rye is there to kind of balance the whole thing out.
Can I interrupt you there for 1 second? And I want you to talk about something. When somebody hears 70% corn and only 10% rye, you imagine in a recipe, well, how can you taste that? Doesn't the corn have such a big sound, and that you don't really hear the small sound of the rye? Like, how can I possibly hear the notes of the rye and the barley? I think it's in the wheat. It's so important because this is such a rare mash, which is what gives it all its flavor. Can you talk a little bit about why that formula is so important and how we're actually tasting that chord of finished flavor?
Yeah, I mean, so our idea when we were kind of fiddling around with mash bills and everything was we wanted there to be a little bit of everything in there. So I wanted to make sure rye was in there. I wanted to make sure wheat was in there, and we had to have corn in there, obviously. So we wanted all those things kind of blend well together. And so what we did is instead of kind of taking our bourbon around to other distillers, we were actually taking it around to chefs, and we were giving them samples of it to see whether or not they thought it was working the way we thought it was working. And for the most part, we got very positive reviews, and people were saying how well this, how the balance was working so well in there, which was, great for me because that's what I was really looking for. And when we decided to do a 4-grain mash bill, the reason for that was because I was wanting to showcase all those grains that we could use. But also at the time when we started, there wasn't that many 4 grains out there. So I was trying to figure out a way to kind of separate ourselves from the rest of the pack. And that was my idea of, 4 grains. There is now obviously more and more 4 grains out there, which is a great thing because it's one of my favorite mash bills is when you can go out and try those 4 grains, because I think they all do work together and one doesn't overshadow the other, which is, sometimes when you do, higher corn mash bills, you're just going to get this straight up corn flavor. And sometimes when you do higher wheat mash bills, it's just very sweet. And it can almost go into the point of like cloying, which is, again, something I didn't really necessarily want.
What's also really interesting about that is those 3 grains are very much like the distiller's mirepoix.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
Because if you're making a crab bisque anywhere in Virginia, and I'm going to argue you're going to find the best soft shell fried crab, or you're going to get the best crab bisque, you can make a really strong argument that it's all about the crab. But if you don't have the mirepoix in it as its foundation and as its base, it's really not going to shine in the way that you want the crab to shine. It needs the backup singers. It needs the foundational mirepoix. So I think this is really a very good teaching point for people who are in the whiskey development, in their whiskey educations and their whiskey journeys and discoveries. Can you talk about when did you fall in love with whiskey? I mean, you're talking about it like the great whiskey people we talk to regularly, and we talk to the great whiskey people on this show. You talk like one of our favorite passionate whiskey people because you clearly are passionate. When did you fall in love with whiskey?
So, we have a kind of joke in our family that we all have a bourbon gene in us. And it was given to us by our grandmother, who I can remember on Christmas morning, her sitting there drinking Old Crow with a whole bunch of ice and a little splash of water in there. And, I was like, oh, that was just always a thing of seeing, whiskey around the household. And I was like, oh, this maybe one day I'll get into that. And then college, I remember someone pulling out a bottle of Wild Turkey 101. And, it's so unfortunate how that is because it was cheap, that's what people bought. And then immediately you drink it and you're like, oh, this is terrible. And then you actually go forward and, learn more about whiskey and more about bourbon. And you go back and drink it and you're like, oh my gosh, how could I have ever said this is horrible? This is fantastic. And so, a little after college, I was drinking a little bit more bourbon here and there. And then, I keep trying new things because that's my favorite thing to do is once I find something, I want to go and try all of those different versions of that one thing, whether it be cheese or beer or, different recipes for different meals. And so my idea, or it kind of turned on for me when I was just after 21, 22, 23, somewhere in that area. And now it's a sickness.
Well, I have to say, this has a wonderful complex, sweet front note.
Yeah.
And it's not the ubiquitous sweetness that one identifies as bourbon. This is unmistakably bourbon, of course, but it's the complexity that you've achieved with the 4-grain mash that lets it be bigger and bolder. And I'm going to say the word brighter. It's a very bright bourbon whiskey, as opposed to, being deep and muddy and earthy.
Yeah. Well, and 70% of your flavor is coming, or up to 70% of your flavor is coming from that barrel. And so the barrels for these ones, or for the one you're trying, came from South Carolina, which is a cooperage. It was called Blackwater, and this was aged in 30-gallon barrels. And this cooperage in South Carolina they have since closed. They were an upstart, and they were actually the barrels we were getting from them. I loved. They leaked a lot of them leaked, which was not necessarily the worst thing, because barrels always leak. But it was the complexities we got out of these barrels, because they were sourcing oak from all over the place, was so amazing. And the barrels on these, I get a note out of these barrels than I get differently from all the other cooperages we use, and it has such a strong cinnamon note to it. And I love that cinnamon note in bourbons that you don't always get. Sometimes you get more vanillins in there, or caramels. The best one is just you get so much more of that baking spice in there, which is like a chocolate chip cookie kind of flavor to it.
Well, I absolutely love the idea that this could be potentially one of the great Manhattans one ever experiences because of those notes. I mean, it's unmistakable. Yeah. And as in all things Manhattan, the use of bitters in some kind act like the baking powder. If you leave bitters out of a Manhattan, it'll go flat. And if you add the bitters, it will rise in its flavor, much like a biscuit will. And so I love the idea that we're in biscuit country with you, and that this is going to wear those, especially with a good old-fashioned Angostura with all those baking spice notes. And then you've got the rye, that 10% rye giving you that, and then you've got the barrel that's accentuating that. I think this would make a sensational Manhattan.
It really does. We make a ton of Manhattans, a ton of old fashions at the distillery, and yeah, people do love them, and bitters are, obviously, they're there to balance out the drink. So it's probably a little bit of Angostura or some Peychaud, because the Peychaud can get a little bit of anise in there, would kind of jazz it up a little bit. It's one of my favorites.
All right, so let's do a grab a pencil recipe. Everybody, grab your pencil. Owen, can you tell us what the classic Ironclad Manhattan might have in it?
Yeah, so it's going to start 2 parts of our straight bourbon. And then we would probably do about a half to 3/4 of an ounce of sweet vermouth. And then I'm always a little heavy-handed on the bitters. So I'd probably do a blend, probably 3 to 4 shakes of a Peychaud bottle, and then 1 to 2 of Angostura. Stir that, and then I would garnish it with a Amarena cherry, just so you can save yourself some money and don't have to buy Luxardos. And then probably a zest of either orange or lemon. Both are really good they both pair really well with our bourbon. So I think that you got to add that little citrusy note right at the end. And
then tell us what sweet vermouth you would prefer, because this has such distinctive character. You really want to let the Ironclad be the star.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the brand we use at the distillery. And I'm drawing a blank, but yes, sweet vermouths. Obviously, any good Italian sweet vermouth would be perfect for it.
Well, we love that. Listen, what's the house toast at Ironclad? What is it that you share with guests when you introduce them to a sip or a taste of what you've made?
I always just start with a very simple, just cheers. When I'm handing over a glass, and they take it, they say thank you. I'm always just cheers. Just a nice way of starting out the drinking process.
And I want to make sure we get a chance, as people are watching, they can see the bottles and the different labels down below, the images here on the screen. Can you just run us through the line, and how many different whiskeys do you produce?
So, depending on the time of year, we will have...
You do have 30,000 square feet, by the way.
Yeah. So depending on the time of year, we've had up to, I believe, 11 different bourbons. We only make bourbon. We've never made any clear liquors. So that's kind of, we waited about a year and a half to sell our first drop, which I do not recommend doing if you are starting a business, but luckily it worked out for us. So that's always good. But it's all started with our small batch bourbon. Our small batch bourbon is our flagship. It is aged for about 14 to 16 months in 15-gallon barrels. This is the one we do really well in cocktails because it's so much more, it lends itself so much more to taking on other flavors, but then still standing up really well in the cocktail. Then we have our straight bourbon, which is what Jennifer's drinking. And then, of course, since we are a craft distillery, we do a lot of finishes. So my finishes, they're not flavored bourbons. So what we do is we give our barrels to local producers whose products can be enhanced by aging in a used bourbon barrel. So we give our barrels to a maple syrup producer in upstate New York. They win blue ribbon after blue ribbon at these festivals, and when they're done done aging their maple syrup, they give the barrels back to us. And so we're now picking up those nice characteristics of maple syrup. And then we have a hot honey, which is probably the world's first hot honey bourbon. And so what we do is we have a guy in Richmond who makes this habanero infused honey that is aged in our used bourbon barrel. So when he takes that honey out, it picks up those nice vanilla notes, and it's just fantastic on pizza or Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
And so then we get the barrels back, and now we're picking up that when you taste that hot honey one, you get that sweetness right up front from that honey because it's honey. Right. And then as it finishes across the back of your palate, you actually pick up that capsaicin sensation from those habaneros. And so it's so different because, you're used to that alcohol burn in the back of your throat anyway, but it's much different, more like the capsaicin sensation. So you get that kind of little heat up there, and it's not face melting or anything like that, but it's enough to let you know that there's some spice there. I always say that one's my favorite one. If you get a cold, you just take a shot of that one, and it's got everything in there that'll knock the cold out of you. It's got spice, it's got bourbon, and it's got honey. So it can cure whatever's wrong with you. That's a guarantee. Then we have a coffee finish.
Ironclad Cure. I love that.
Yeah, we have a coffee finish. So it's the same process.
Oh, yeah.
We give our barrel to a coffee roaster. They put their coffee beans in our used bourbon barrels. One of their biggest sellers at the coffee shop is this bourbon barrel aged coffee, and then we get the barrels back, put our bourbon back in there. And so, some of our the maple syrup is kind of subtle on the finish, but our coffee is not subtle at all. We keep it at cask strength, so it's 125. We're usually around 125. The current batch is 117, but yeah, it's straight up. This is the one you put in your morning coffee, and people wonder why you're so much happier at work.
And by the way, the one that we were on is the 95 proof. Is that correct?
So the one you're currently drinking is 100 proof.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we have then we have our Missouri Toasted Oak. We called it that because my dad is from Missouri, and our cooperage is in Missouri as well. And so it's a toasted barrel finish, a double oaked finish. It's going to get with those toastings, you get that nice softer vanillins. So it's a little sweeter of a bourbon because of those toasting the barrels instead of the charring of the barrels. We have a monitor blend bourbon. So this is everything I previously told you is our 4-grain mash bill. Now the next couple ones I'm going to tell you are our different mash bills. So we made a monitor blend. So this one is kind of cool. I was out in Bardstown Bourbon Company in Bardstown, and we were trying their in Kentucky. Yeah. We were trying their different mash bills as White Dogs, and I took a sip of one of their White Dogs, which is they were a very big open book there. They would give you anything you want. And so I took a sip of this White Dog, and it was the best White Dog I've ever had. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is sweet. This is complex. I love it so much. And I was like, can I see the bottle? And because the bottle had the printed recipe on it or the percentages of grain. And they said, of course. And I was like, do you mind if I take a picture? And they go, no, go ahead. So I took a picture of it. And as soon as I got back to Virginia, I recreated that mash bill. because I loved it that much. And when it came off my still, it tasted different because of course it would, but I was really incredibly happy with it. So that is our Monitor blend. And then we have our Old Colonel. So Old Colonel, we called it that because it's not spelled like Colonel, like from the armed services. It's spelled like Colonel, like the corn. We found a farmer over on the eastern shore of Virginia who has been growing this corn. He's been growing it for the last 25 years, but he bought it off another farmer whose family had been farming it since 1865.
Wow.
And so this corn is, not genetically modified. It's multicolored. It's red, white, purple, yellow, blue. It's got all these colors. And then the corn itself, since it was an Indian corn, it's very naturally sweet. So I wanted to kind of see what it tasted like. So we actually made cornbread with it, following kind of the steps of what they did at Maker's Mark, to kind of see if we just wanted to be a corn mash bill or if we wanted to have different grains in there. And the corn is so sweet, you didn't have to add any sugar to it. So the cornbread was spectacular. And I was like, okay, well, we figured this one out. So this one is
supposed to taste like, right?
Yeah. So the mash bill on that one is 76% corn, 78% corn, 10% rye, and 12% malted barley.
Wow.
The reason for that was just because I didn't want it to be one note corn, because it was very good, but I didn't want it to just taste like corn when you're drinking it. So the rye was just in there for a little bit of balance in there, to make sure you get that little bit of something different as you're sipping through it. And then we also have a bottled and bond. This year we released our first ever 6-year bourbon, or 5-year bottled and bond, which is the oldest barrel we ever released. So coming up here soon, next couple of years, we've got a couple 6-year barrels that'll be ready. So just the beauty of bourbon, it's a waiting game. You have to have a lot of patience to get into this thing.
Now, I'm really curious. You told us that you have 30,000 square feet when we started. How much of that 30,000 square feet is taken up with bourbon barrels waiting their turn? Because I imagine this vast, almost Tucker-like, in the movie Tucker, where they took over an airplane hangar. I'm trying to imagine what 30,000 square feet of bourbon looks like.
So it's a 3-level building, and it's 10,000 square feet each floor. So the first floor is distillery, tasting room with a little bit of space for barrels, because that's where we started. We had about 1,000 square foot area for barrels. And then, we started making more and more and more. And then we had to go up to the third floor. So the third floor now is about 3/4 filled with barrels. And so that is almost at capacity. Probably will fill it by the end of this year. And then the second floor isn't touched yet, which is good, because that means we still have more room for barrels.
All right. Well, there's room to grow too. Oh, and
Exactly.
Would you please come back and visit us again when you come up with new iterations? Because hot honey coffee, I'm now swooning. Where can we find these?
So on our website, you can go. We can ship to 41 different states at the moment. So if you just go to ironcladdistillery.com, you can go through and we can ship those bottles out to you. We are also distributed in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and DC. And then of course, Virginia.
Well, congratulations. It's been really lovely having you here with us, and we can't wait to have more people give this a try. I love the history of it, and I am just so fascinated and a little bit obsessed right now with the idea of Virginia cuisine culture and Virginia whiskey culture.
As a quick aside, so we a couple times a year we change our name from Ironclad to Iron Clam, so that we can do a clam and oyster roast. And then of course I have this is the second one I've done, but I have a Virginia ham aging in our barrel room. So
absorbing the angel's share.
Exactly. That's the plan.
That's awesome. What a great idea. As a native New Englander, and like I said, I grew up at the Constitution Marina by Old Ironsides. I am really aware of that cuisine culture and how important it is. I'm fluent in those flavors, and that you have a clam and oyster roast. I'm trying to imagine, how can I raise my hand to volunteer to, like, bust the shells or bust the tables or shuck some clams for you? Because I would love to come to one of those. It sounds right up my alley.
We'd love to have you.
Owen King and Ironclad Distillery can be found on the World Wide Web, and you can increasingly find their products in the Northeast, and you can get them in all, I think he said 41 states. And we're looking forward to making sure that you give this a try. It's really interesting, and I hope that you join us in raising your glass and say, I like cheers, but when you're talking about the coastline of Virginia, it's kind of Anchors Away territory. So cheers.
Cheers. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Did you meet these fantastic men? Ian, Paul, it's so lovely to have you here with us. Welcome. And I raise my glass to welcome you.
We have the Vice President of Marketing from Zing Zang, the company who makes the best, not only mixers, but now ready-to-drink cocktails. Extraordinary friend Diane Mina joins us from her home in Las Vegas, where she has
Whether you are thinking about becoming a restaurateur or you are already in the business, Michael Politz has written a must-read, The Food and Beverage Magazine's Guide to Restaurant Success. Pick up your copy today at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, or wherever fine books are sold.